I am going to tell some tales and about accessibility here. And I am domains boy. However, I'm also disconnected domains boy. I'm not the domains boy. I'm a domains boy, just like the rest of you are actually pretty much superheroes too, and you don't know it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about some accessibility, a few stories. Now, I'm going to say mythical campus because I would appreciate this being recorded, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you cannot infer that anything I'm going to talk about is directly related to the school at which I have a day job. I'm actually pulling from several schools, and we would not want to give the wrong impression about anything from there. But a lot of folks are experiencing that accessibility is coming to campus, and leadership understands it. And the reality is, this is a good thing. I mean, accessibility is a good thing. And that's usually how it starts out. And for those of us in the open movement, it really needs to be a good thing because we're supposed to be about open. We're supposed to be about pulling people in. And that's essentially what accessibility is. I can also tell you personally, not as domains boy, but as Jim Luke, especially if you followed anything on the blogging I did like early in March, I'm what I characterize as a part-time legally blind guy. I have very specialized medical contact lenses that essentially correct for the fact that I have very deformed corneas. And without those lenses, I'm great for 14 hours a day. Without them, I'm not safe. Now, there's a lesson here for accessibility. Not only is accessibility important, but how it's delivered is very important. And there is no single best solution. Because my disease, keratoconus, is fairly rare, maybe about 1 in 3,000 in the US, and I'm a little bit more than moderate case. What you have to do to make things better for me, or what I have to have, is exactly counter to what you do to improve things for visual impairment, the majority of visual impairment. So when you make it better for them, you actually make it worse for me. You can't fix both. So where I think accessibility gets off the rails is a lot of times it becomes the initiative. And that's really where you can get into a deep trouble on the campus. I may or may not have been pulled into this, and largely reluctantly. By standing by, I was playing open guy for too long, and in a campus close to me, this is kind of, now that we've been into this effort for about 1.5 years, this is kind of what's happened. Basically, we've sucked the life out of just about everybody on the campus. And along with it, I hesitate to think of the opportunity cost. So, and we're in some respects, we're better off, we're in better position, yes, in accessibility, but we're really not there. We're far from it. So, I want to make this, I don't want to just talk for an hour. I know I'm perfectly capable of that. So do a thing quick, pair off with somebody, and just share in the story of accessibility on your campus, or where are you with regard to accessibility on your campus? In other words, who are you? Just share with each other, real quick, 15, 20 seconds. Where do you teach, work, whatever? What's your role in accessibility? What's going on with accessibility in your campus? And then pair off with each other and share it. Jason. Two-year campus with the I am the person who's trying to be helpful and trying to say
Just a quick question. We are.
Okay. Okay, so quickly we'll come back. So just a couple of, anybody want to volunteer? Do we have anybody where accessibility hasn't happened at all or hasn't? Okay, so everybody's been touched. Anybody totally, oh, this was great. We've got this under control, no problem. Okay. Any other particular perspectives? Anybody relate to some of the kind of imagination I've got there? Okay. What I'm going to do now is I want to tell the second tale, if you will. This is my observations as I got pulled into this. As I got pulled into a lot, I had originally taken a posture of a lot of stuff. Hey, I'm overseeing the Open Learn Lab. We've got a bunch of WordPress sites. I'll make sure our stuff's cool. I'll just watch, you know. I teach econ. I'll make sure my stuff's good. I thought maybe it might be train wreck coming. I ain't getting involved. That was actually, in retrospect, I kind of a mistake. And the school, we made a lot of errors. And initiatives that start with good intentions, but a lot of times things get out of control. Oops. Villains and monsters often start out nice. And monsters have henchmen. But the henchmen on accessibility are usually in our mind. And what they amount to is, what I could see was a lot of errors in thinking, a lot of assumptions that people didn't really research. Because one of the things I did when I started to get pulled into this was, oh my God, I don't really understand what some of this is about. And so I, started going back and doing research. I strongly recommend it. If you're in the US, for example, go check out EDUCAUSE archives. EDUCAUSE has a couple of, I think they did in 2015. They've updated it since. They've got a site with links to the actual PDFs of every major court decision in higher ed related to accessibility. They've identified from all those court decisions 18 major risk factors. It's enormously illuminating. It may not be at all what you think it is. That's really the problem. So it's kind of 10 steps to detonation. The first one is the project, the initiative usually starts with, well, the law requires it. Yeah, that's kind of the wrong reason to start. So they'll often then go and then tell you, well, that's the wrong reason to do it because the law requires it. But then they begin with this implication of it's the right thing to do, which carries a real powerful subtext of, if you in any way question or challenge any of this and the perceived wisdom of how we're going to go about it, you are a bad person. Why do you hate our students? Which is a very difficult posture to overcome. Now, the reason pushing the law is wrong is because it conveys the wrong concept. It conveys the idea that law is about compliance and that the law sets a standard. True, in the United States, and I don't know that much about the EU standards, the law does set a standard of sorts in terms of, there's a bunch of different laws that actually apply. It's not the law. There's a bunch of different aspects of ADA, Americans with Disability Act, a bunch of other separate laws that all come into play, but essentially you end up with 508 and 504 stuff. And you, as a school, 508 stuff has a very rigorous standard. 508 stuff is the stuff that anyone from the general public, which includes your staff, because your staff could be pulled from the public, has to be accessible. Period. That means the school website, the yourcollege.edu. That means your student information site. That means your ability to register. That means your photocopy machine for your staff. That means the teaching station that's all touch. How's a blind person get into that classroom and set up the teaching station? Those are all things, that's 508, that's a rigorous standard. Teaching materials, which everybody jumps to, are section 504. And the standard is effectively, the standard is you must make equivalent educational experience available in a timely manner. It doesn't say every web page you ever use in class has to pass some sort of accessibility checker. It says you have to be, so you've got a lot of room for accommodation. So the third thing is the law is not just about classroom materials, and you have accommodation on there. You want to go with classroom materials because accommodation is the expensive way to do it, because usually there's a ton of human labor involved in a timely manner on that. Fourth thing is talking about it as the law then conjures up the idea that 100% compliance is the goal, and that compliance is the goal. Well, on teaching materials, you're probably never going to have 100% that the materials are deemed accessible. Plus, the question of what's accessible is itself not really well defined. It depends on the type of materials. It depends, the World Wide Web Consortium itself, WCAG, the Web Consortium Accessibility Group, defines a so-called standard. It's actually a recommendation, WCAG 2.1 now, and it actually has 3 levels of supposed levels of compliance. You pick what you want to do, level A, AA, or AAA. Those all have different implications for what you would do in a website.
Or if you're unlucky, your institutional system picks a level for you.
Right, and a lot of times that's why I said I was reluctant to get involved early on. I regret that because those decisions all got made without the benefit of someone doing some research on it first. So that leads to an attitude that says we need to fix the accessibility. Like, okay, the problem is we have teaching materials. We just need to fix the ones we have. Like it's I don't know. It's like it's a deficit model, and it's like a kind of one-time thing. And that's not really where you want to go. What you want is, and in fact, if you go and look at those law cases, those settlements, very rarely did a university or college get in deep trouble because the court said you have way too much course materials and they're not accessible. Usually the settlement is along the lines of you haven't made a genuine, credible effort yet. And the settlement is, what are you going to do about it from here? What are you doing going forward? Do you have a policy? Do you have directors in charge of this? Are you devoting resources? Are you devoting training and development to every employee? That's what the courts usually look for. That's what they want to see. So, fixing it also then leads to the next thought, which is, oh, this is a technical problem. And then that leads you to ideas of, well, we can use checkers and automate it. Now, software companies help with that, because if you sign up for the paid Adobe Pro, you can get accessibility checker built in. And so it will open your PDF documents and give you a readout of accessibility issues. Microsoft has built that into Office, at least for Word and Excel and PowerPoint. The problem with the checkers is, folks, it's a computer. It can't tell. All it can really do is go through your file and go, and basically do a kind of quasi-AI correlation thing of going, most times that we've seen this before, there was some sort of accessibility issue. So it's basically flagging issues, most of which you need a human judgment as to what's the real problem here. And sometimes it may not be what they're flagging, and maybe it is not a problem at all. So thinking it's a technical fix and that you use checkers oftentimes leads to, well, what we need is more software training. And that means, so somebody e-learning, whatever your faculty development is, we need them to go out and train faculty in how to use the checkers and fix their documents. Which then leads to an orientation of we have to have checklist and project and deadline. And then any questions that pop up about how to do this stuff, because let me guarantee you they will, because accessibility documents check fixing is relatively, I won't say easy. You can actually, there's a handful of issues that cover 80-90% of your problems. But when you go out to faculty and you're talking about making materials available to a broad base of people and hitting all the tails, in other words, truly making them accessible, you start getting into some really gnarly problems. And that's where I came in as an econ prof, for example. Like, how do I explain in an online course the graph for optimal monopolistic output? So I have a monopoly. That graph, if you're not familiar with it, has 3 very curvy lines. 2 are U-shaped, the one's a J-shaped, has to go right through the bottom of the other 2 U-shapes. There's 2 downward sloping left lines to the right. There's all kinds of intersections. You go up to this, you go up to that, and you come across, and how do I do that in alt text? So what happens, you have to rethink. It's not a question of fixing the slide. It's a question of rethinking how would I present it and providing different alternatives. So in the long run, it's actually better to do the accessibility stuff because it does help us rethink some teaching and actually come up with better stuff that helps everybody. Like one of the things I do now is I start building, it's a series of about 12 slides, and I build up that graph just adding one line at a time. And that way and then I put description in as to what I just did, referencing the previous one. Turns out that helps all the students. So the problem then is if you've done all this and the school's going down this road, at this point, when people come up with the hard questions, like, when our biology folks said, how do I represent organic graphic molecules, maps in this stuff, when our philosophy teachers came up with, how do I do represent, symbolic logic in accessible format online? The questions get a lot harder, and it's very easy for leadership or for whoever's in charge of the project feeling the pressure of the deadline to then go, aha, this is resistance. And so you flip from detailed technical training of, okay, open up Microsoft Word and go to this menu, click this, you get the checker open, let it run, then you go and you read the issues and you go this, that. But if you're in Adobe, don't do that. In Adobe, go open up on this menu and click this and get a different thing, and when it says such and such, it's very different. We go from that kind of training to, okay, since that's not fixing it, we jump back to the beginning. So why do you want to be bad people? Don't you want to be good people and help everybody? Because it's the law. So, I don't know. I don't have a time. Okay. So rather than, I'm going to come back to this, I think, at the end. What I want to do is, so that was kind of like the real negative tale. That's how you can suck things away. Because people become pressured for the deadline. Everything becomes a fix-it mode. It takes all the fun out of everything. It starts driving out the thinking of the pedagogy, and it just becomes a technical exercise. Folks that are tech resistant become even more tech resistant because they don't really want to know Word that well, and they don't want to memorize it. And in the long run, it's probably not going to help you anyway. So, there is an uplifting side. And this dawned on me at some point. And this is why I call the superhero. We actually, those of us doing domains projects or something similar, or any kind of thinking through this stuff, there's a middle ground that makes a huge difference, and it involves digital literacy. So I've nicknamed this DigLit woman. It's a woman because we have enough men heroes. And they get problematic. Anyway, although actually, if it's truly accessible, the viewer would be able to change the gender, choose the gender. Because the superpower that DigLit woman has is that DigLit woman appears to the viewer or the reader according to how the viewer or the reader needs them. DigLit woman that isn't set ahead of time. In other words, DigLit woman's based off of, from a technical perspective, the separation of HTML and CSS. So let me give you, so this becomes the key. And what I started to figure out was faculty, particularly the folks I work with, don't really understand. Now, this is why I say digital literacy. They don't really understand, and they think it's just way too technical. They don't know what's going on behind the screen. And they don't really care, but actually it makes a difference. Oops. Because if we can reset their mind, and what I finally figured out, what most of them are doing is they're stuck in document syndrome. Regardless of their age, because this dawned on me when I finally noticed a pattern. I'd be talking to some faculty members, and folks that I thought were really sophisticated, digital-oriented faculty, doing lots of stuff. They did some online stuff. They did, Word. They did all kinds of stuff. And one of them, for example, wrote an OER, about 150-page book. Awesome. Great book. I was going to just import it into our Pressbooks install and publish it as an ebook, which is great. It takes a couple of minutes. Pressbooks just takes a well-structured Word document, imports it, images and all, bam, off we go. I, my student intern, imported it. Oh my God, what a disaster. So we go back and we look at the Word doc. And the Word doc is a mess. It looks okay, but they wrote a document. They used the machine as if it's a fancy typewriter that you don't need whiteout for. They mix it so they're used to WYSIWYG, and they're used to the idea of mentally, even though they know they're working, whether it's creating a Word document and most Adobes start as a Word document, most PDFs, at least in our experience, or a PDF, and they're going to PDF, or whether they're even doing stuff on the web page in WordPress, they're still thinking they've got this space, and they aren't necessarily consciously enunciating it, but basically, if you went in their brain, they're thinking 8.5 by 11 white sheet of paper. And they're thinking, I want this paper to look this way. I want it to say this, and I want it to look this way, because that's how I want the reader to view it. So, and a lot of the tools we have today are WYSIWYG. We type, and we see how we want it. Yeah.
Is this the same syndrome that 10 or 15 years ago gave you HTML documents with font family, font size, and that treated HTML like it was a page description language?
Exactly. Yeah, because that's from an older era. For example, if you take Word, I forget which version, like 7 or something like that, something from around 2007, and you exported actually today, if you export to HTML from Word and you opened up that HTML file, it looks like crap, because Word is treating every sentence like, oh, we're just adding it, we're styling every sentence. It's all mixed in together. The way to think digitally is, and even Word does this but nobody knows it, is you separate content. You need to have well-structured content, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then you need to have style and layout is a whole separate thing. And then you have a third thing, which is the collection of non-text stuff, image files. And you keep that as a collection. And in really sophisticated stuff, there's a fourth collection of things, which is various pieces of code that define interactive elements. You bundle all of these files up together, and that's what you deliver to people. Now, what's the advantage of that? The advantage of separating those two is you can focus on the message and structuring the message. You have now enabled the viewer / reader / listener to now format and make it appear how they need it to appear. Now, for those of you who are not in, most of the mainstream way you can relate to that is I'm sure you've all had the experience of responsive websites versus regular websites, right? The right way to code a website these days is to code it so that when you have a big screen, it looks nice. And most WordPress themes will work this way these days. But if you shrink this window down, such as it would appear on a phone, it's very readable. It just takes the text, narrows the space for it, and it flows the text just longer. Great. Similar phenomena, that's allowing the viewer, and that's basically going, the text, the content file, doesn't need to know or care how it's being delivered. And then you build a style, in this case WordPress theme, that basically queries, okay, so what are we doing this for? Or which kind of device are we going this for? Let them pick it. Now, how does that have to deal with accessibility? If you're dealing with a blind person, visually impaired, and they're using some sort of browser reader thing, like JAWS or any of the other things, that's all JAWS is it's just another form of browser that takes your text content and reads it out loud and says, oh, screw the layout. There's no point in doing that because it doesn't make any difference. Or you do that, you don't have to, people like me, I don't need to use JAWS, but if I don't have my lenses in, I'm going to bounce that browser up to about 200% zoom. And fine, it's still good. So that's really what you need to think is empower the reader. That's really where the accessibility comes in. Empower the reader to do it their way. So to do that, what we're delivering is we're not creating a document. We're not creating a page. We're actually creating a package we deliver that enables them to do that. So actually, when I say this is digital literacy, because it's actually very common, and with a domains package, particularly if you got folks that you can show at the back end of your server, you can show them how all this stuff is structured. You go into WordPress. WordPress is basically built this way. How many folks have used WordPress at least once or twice? Okay. So you know the whole routine, right? You go in and you create the post or the content, right? The page. Now you have some options there, like picking headers versus regular paragraphs type stuff. But the appearance is all handled by the theme. Okay, that's the separation. So the CSS goes over in the theme, the HTML goes over in the other. Media library is a whole different separation. And code is basically plugins. HTML web pages are basically the same thing. You can put the HTML and the CSS in the same file, technically, but mostly the standards these days are you write an HTML file with the content, it references a CSS file that describes the outlay or the output, and then it all references and hyperlinks to all the image files, and then you do code in PHP JavaScript files. What a lot of folks don't know is that Word actually does the same structure. You can take a Word, remember when they went from .doc to docx? The X means that file is actually a zip file. It's actually a folder. You can take your docx file, change the suffix to .zip, Then you can run it through your unzip program, extract it, and what you will find are sets of files. Some are that are content files. Now they don't use HTML, they use a proprietary language written using XML, but your content will all be in the XML. There will be other files that affect the styling, and again, they're using proprietary rules because it's Word and it's Microsoft. And then there'll be another folder for all the image files. Same kind of concept. So I've been referring to this idea of structured text. Why am I on time? Oh, good. I've been referring to the idea of structured text or semantic markup. And I struggled to try to get across to people what, it wasn't just that you want a text file of the content. It needs to be structured. Now the technical term, of course, in web developer designer circles is semantic markup. And a lot of times the accessibility folks will talk about semantic markup. What does that mean in plainer English? Well, it basically means the primary HTML tags that you need to use are things like the header tags, H1, H2, H3, H4, H5. Things like, and actually we're all familiar with the goodies like bold and italics, B and I. But there are actually now, those are being somewhat deprecated and replaced by things like, for example, I believe it's just EM. I may have that wrong. Huh? Emphasis? Not M. M is actually M space, I think. But there is a tag for, it's called emphasis. Most browsers, Chrome, Firefox, etc., will display a bold tagged word and an emphasis word the same. They'll be visually. But they have important implications for these other alternative browsers, like a JAWS and stuff like that. And, you know, tags for alt text, there's tags for reading order. What these things are is it's not so much fancy code, the way a lot of people think, oh, I don't want to go in there because I don't code. It's, and you don't need to put them in yourself, you know, use a what you see, what you get editor, is you're basically putting nothing but your content here, but you're erecting road signs so that it doesn't matter what kind of vehicle these people are using to navigate your content or to display your content. So it'd be like putting up road signs, and you don't care whether they're going to use a car, a truck, a bicycle, or they're going to walk. They can do it. So for example, that's why you use H1, H2, and H3 headers. Which gets me to, in summary, you can knock out probably 80, you know, keeping in mind that 83.7% of all statistics cited in conference presentations are made up. I would estimate 80% of all the accessibility issues you run into largely amount to failure to add correct headers. It's the bad habit of going, oh, I'm starting another section of my document, so I'll write 4 words, put them on their own line, I will bold them in Word, I will make them, oh, instead of 12 point, I'll make them 18 point and underline them. I've put a section heading in. No, you haven't. Use the style heading. Now, if the style heading in Word doesn't make it look the way you want, they've actually made that incredibly easy to redefine the style heading. But it's important to label the style heading. That faculty member that wrote the document, the textbook, that was the biggest failure. There were no headings. They were all those kinds of things like that, which made it impossible for a system to navigate. When you put those headers in, people can navigate. People that are listening can go, oh, okay, so this is that. I want to jump down to the next, jump down 3 levels. Alt text is probably the second biggest thing that you have. And then in things like Word or PowerPoint, it's probably reading order. Fourth one I don't know how well, actually, this is kind of an issue too, is reading, is color contrast. Ending up with bad color contrast. But again, you can fix that stuff with good digital literacy and good tools. You know, for example, if you give folks, I try to really make sure folks don't use any, unfortunately there are a lot of WordPress themes that are not accessibility friendly, but if you pick a good theme, and the repository for free ones will now flag those, you pick a good theme, most of your worries are taken care of. Just do your structuring, do your alt text on your images when you upload them, and if there's space for it, do all that kind of stuff, and you're good to go. It takes care, the theme will take care of the color contrast and those kinds of things. Just don't screw around with it. So that's kind of my idea, that there's a heck of a lot, because once I started getting some folks to rethink this, it then became now I know how to make my documents better going forward. We didn't have to worry about trying to fix things. And then they also started to rethink, you know what? My existing stuff isn't really well structured. So it became not just a fix of making it accessible, but making it better. Yeah.
Well, I don't know, are we kind of into the discussion? I don't want to cut you
Yeah,
off.
go to discussion. I'm done.
I mean, yes, everything's good, except comparatively, text is easy.
Right.
What's hard is like what you said with your curves and your graph with your 17 lines and curves on it. And I've noticed a lot of tension between how do we make sure we do what we need to do from accessibility standpoints, and this desire to move beyond giant blocks of text, whether that's images, audio, video. You know, I had one person who had done a lot of audio stuff and was the best thing we could come up with was run it all through, drag and dictate and then clean it up. And you know, that probably would have been less of a mess had you done it from the beginning. But even doing it from the beginning, taking non-text content and trying to think about how you're going to deal with any number of accessibility issues is a lot more challenging and a lot more scary for people, for instructional staff, and a lot more daunting.
I absolutely agree with you, and you're spot on, which is why the way you approach the kind of initiative and let's fix the documents, I think, is because what happens is that gets in the way and sucks up the time and energy when that is the real problem. That's where the hard part is because a lot of times that's actually thinking through, sometimes we've got a lot of visual stuff there just because we thought it was cool and neat and sexy because that's left over from we have to be edutainers as well, and it's not actually pedagogically needed. And matter of fact, we discovered some stuff that, it's cute. It's getting in the way of actually, non-disabled people learning because it's distracting. But there are genuine hard problems. And, and ultimately, sometimes you get into can't be fixed, you gotta look at accommodations instead of, making accessibility law from them. There's also always the issue of, you can go, the law says equivalent experience in a timely manner. Doesn't say everybody has to use the same thing. So some other thoughts, projects. Yeah, John.
Well, part of what we are doing is very much what you said at the end about trying to convince people that there are, 5 tricks you can learn that will improve 80% of your use cases. And yes, the other 20 are going to take you a lot more. Right. That is the approach that we're trying to use. Is what are the things we can do that will address some of the lowest barrier. One of the other things that people didn't say in regard to video is that there are 2 requirements for video. There's captioning, which is where most of us start, and there's audio description of the scene. which is much more complicated to do. But how are you going to make the captions are for making audio accessible to the hearing impaired. The audio description is for making video accessible to the blind. And that is, at that point, you're really into a translation issue that's almost artistic. But again, if you can start with things like, if you made a script for your video, put it on your website, ta-da, we're done!
Right.
So there are things like that. Now, unfortunately, my faculty members want to stare into the camera and extemporize. So they're going to get YouTube captions, and we're going to clean up YouTube captions.
I had one where I told her to write the script. She wrote the script, and she starts recording, and she could not bring herself to read the script she had written. She started it about 3 times.
Well,
it does make me wonder.
okay, I personally can relate to that. I'm an old college speaker and extemporaneous speaker. I literally can't read a script.
I don't mean to throw anybody under the bus on that issue, although I do wonder under the equivalency issue, if you were to say, these are my remarks as written, or as prepared.
It's fine. It's
and
equivalent.
I'm sorry if they're not.
It is not
remarks as
equivalent content. It's equivalent educational experience. In other words, can they learn the same concept in the same time frame, an approximate time frame? And by same time frame meaning, oh, everybody else is doing this in week 2, and we're not getting around to it, providing you with a transcript until week 6.
Right.
That's not same time frame. Does it take you a little longer? Yes, that's possible.
Although one of the, I would say one of the sorry.
Do you have any experience with getting students to be more accessible in their creation content?
A little bit, and I think this is also somewhere we need, from a curriculum standpoint, because the issue there is, they don't get exposed to any of it. Actually, it's interesting. They don't get exposed with how to do anything. We assume everybody knows how to use Word, just like we hire people and say, and new versions come out and nobody ever gets trained on anything because, that doesn't happen these days. So we have to educate them how to do it. I've not seen the resistance by students, in what little experience we've had, I've not seen resistance by students. They're actually kind of, oh, sure, I didn't know how to do that. Now, oh, sure, we want to make that. But
We did actually just use the put your outline/transcripts for a podcasting. It was a podcasting project that fed into a website.
Okay.
And the template that the students were told to follow said, here's where you link your SoundCloud file, and here's where you put your transcript. And part of it was we just kind of said, this makes your document accessible. And it wasn't terribly targeted education on an issue.
Right.
It was just this time do it this way because it's better for everyone. The end.
I do actually have a question. Based on what you were talking about with Microsoft Word, have you had an experience with Google Docs doing that? Because I know a lot of students have Google as or the G Suite as their single sign in their email.
Not a lot, and I have not tried to evaluate a lot of Google Docs for accessibility. I know my impression was that, at least as of like a year ago, Google was definitely behind Microsoft in these kinds of issues. Microsoft was pushing hard on that, partly because Microsoft, has a big corporate market, bigger corporate market, and so it's more critical to their business. My impression is that Google's been catching up, but again, I don't know what it is. What I do know is that Google has all of the Google Docs has all the features to, again, get you most of the basics. It's structuring the document, tagging it properly, and do that stuff. Now, I wouldn't extend that necessarily to Google Sites. I don't know about that. That would be a whole thing. And by the way, I should also caution, if you are a serious hardcore developer, like the kind of person who might create your own WordPress theme, especially if you're starting with something like underscores and then you're going to create a theme or something like that, or you're going to start doing elaborate sites, you want to go much farther than this. You do want to dig into a lot of the detail particularly the WCAG specifications and guidance and stuff like that. In that case, you're adding a whole layer of complexity, and the layer of complexity is usually related to the navigation. It's like what happens with menus, and what does a non-visual user encounter experience when they hit a menu. You get into a bunch of ARIA type stuff and what buttons and functionality, and I steer clear of that. I just try to use known themes and simple, straightforward menus. So, any other questions? Yeah, Joe.
I guess I'll say, I think your question on the screen is really interesting, in part because it feels to me like there's an awful lot of reinventing the wheel happening
I think there is.
on each individual campus. And I think looking for ways that we might be able to find some interinstitutional cooperation, and that's, I haven't gotten any farther than you put up there, other than to say doing it as a community has the potential to be really powerful. If it means figuring out, I don't know, GitHub repositories of documents that could use help, or the community captions options in YouTube.
Or teaching materials to teach faculty and students some of these basic concepts. Because I guess what I'm trying to push is the idea of way too much of this work on accessibility gets way down in the weeds. It gets really technical, which first of all is going to be real short-lived. When the next version of Word comes out, you're all blown out of the water anyway. It's way too focused on, we have these kinds of documents and what to do this and there. We need to elevate people a little bit more so they see the bigger picture, so that when another version comes along, they understand what's really happening. And so they begin thinking of how they structure this kind of stuff.
Yeah. But finding some way towards interinstitutional faculty development might be an interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Plus, I think this is a level of education that's needed not just for users that are creating documents or creating sites, because that's actually one of the big shifts too, is to break people of the idea of documents.
Mm-hmm.
You're creating digital communications. Because even the documents these days are delivered by the web. And we're facing a few barriers. One, I think I've noticed that a lot of administrators who themselves are not doing the documents, but they think this is what we need to do. And so that gets in the way. They need to understand some of these concepts as well. And I think the other pitch I put in is I think the LMSs, not surprisingly, I'm not a fan of LMS, but I think they are not doing us any favors on these at all, because most of the LMSs deliberately try to blur the distinction between documents and web. And I know, like, we use D2L. It will call something a web page. It ain't a web page.
Right.
If it ain't got HTML header tag, it ain't a web page. And they blur all that stuff for folks, and then they put this checker in. Blackboard's got a similar one. Now, Blackboard's checker ally is pretty good. It's much more helpful, but both of them, the checkers mislead people into thinking, oh, well, I'm good. Actually, you know what? You can fail this. It's more common than not. People can pass checkers and still have issues in their document, particularly anytime on tables. Oh, that was one thing I missed. Rule of thumb, table. If anybody used a table for layout, that's bad. Don't use table for layout. Tables are for tabular data, not layout. Just rethink what you want to see.
And there are more and less accessible ways to do those tables
Yeah.
for tabular data.
Yeah. Yeah, what we found was a lot of people were laying tables out. Because, I want this line, and then, 3 columns of this or that. And when I finally went to him and said, this is a real problem, because you're just doing this for table. I said, well, what else can we do? This is how it has to be. I said, wait, no, actually what you're doing is you're using 2-dimensional table to convey a 2-level hierarchy. What you really wanted was label each line, and then put 3 sub-bullets. That was the 3 items in the 3 columns. Then another one is it starts the next line. It says, if you do it that way, you can do it with numbered or unnumbered lists in HTML, and bam, you got the accessibility because it'll reformat, it's navigable, it's structured, it's all that good. You don't have to worry about table. Okay, well, end of the day, we're all probably busy.
We still got time if you want
You got
to
time?
continue, but,
I've just,
Yeah, Mark.
yeah.
So at the Creative Commons Summit earlier in the year, Ryerson University shared 5 courses that they've created on accessibility,
Oh, good.
which include different textbooks.
Yeah.
And one of them's web accessibility for developers. I'll share a link on
Great.
Twitter and you can pick it up on the tweet.
Awesome. Awesome.
And that's shared with an open license, right, so we could turn it into web development for teachers?
I'm guessing because they were at the Creative Commons Summit.
Yeah,
it
right.
is open source.
Yeah, that's why I really put an emphasis, like, pick your tools carefully. Think about the accessibility before you pick the tools, rather than pick the tool, oh, because I like this or that, and then you get into it, now how do I make things accessible? That's why, like in WordPress, pick your themes carefully, make sure the themes was done that way. That's also why I'm real reluctant, we're still running Classic Editor everywhere we can,
Yeah.
rather than Gutenberg. I haven't read the entire accessibility audit on Gutenberg. My understanding of it, though, summary level, is that Gutenberg does, for the most part, generate accessible output that you're creating. The accessibility issues, though, are very deep and embedded, and they have to do with the interface itself.
So they're not accessible as an editor. It's
Right,
accessible
for
as,
the editor, the creator,
yeah,
the site operator.
yeah.
So, if you're thinking domains,
Right.
you got domains for students, yeah, that's a problem.
It's a big problem.
Or for general faculty, If you're talking about a website, okay, you're the only one maintaining it, it's your word, whatever like that, it's probably not an issue, if it works for you. Or similarly, like, I know Pressbooks, I'm impressed, bad pun, because Pressbooks has put a lot of time and energy into making sure its stuff is very accessible, so I feel comfortable of, the law is not about 100%. So I'm comfortable, I can put stuff into there and we're good. If it fits and it works, and assuming we hit all the main things like put an image in, make sure it's got all text, that kind of stuff.
All right, well, I think we can wrap up and kind of transition downstairs.
Oh,